committed to closing the Dadaab refugee complex. This decision has been made by government reflecting the fact that the camps have become hosting ground for Al-Shabaab, as well as centers of smuggling and contraband trade, besides being enablers of illicit weapon proliferation.
Home to over 300,000 people, the Dadaab refugee camp in northern Kenya is the largest in the world, but now it's shutting down. The Kenyan government has drawn up a solid timetable for the camp's closure, something that they say is driven by economic and security realities. Now, this prompted the UN refugee agency, UNHCR, to voice profound concern over the move and call for reconsideration. But Kenya hit back, claiming that support from the international community has always been dismal. So where to from here for Dadaab's roughly 350,000 refugees? And is there no turning back now for Kenya's plans to close Dadaab? I'm Penina Karibe. Welcome to Talk Africa. The UNHCR, Kenya and Somalia signed a tripartite agreement in 2013 to repatriate Somali refugees voluntarily. As Somalia has slowly started recovering from war and chaos, Dadaab has shrunk from more than 500,000 people to about 350,000. But Kenyan Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed reiterated last week that it's necessary to speed up the process to protect Kenya's national security, and there is simply no turning back now. CCTV's Robert Nagila filed this report.
A refuge for more than 300,000 people, mainly Somalis. Many of them were born here. Many have died here.
This will be done.
But President Uhuru Kenyatta's government claims Dadaab is actually a haven for terrorists. An expensive one too. And says it's time the camp was shut.
Kenya cannot look aside and allow this threat to escalate any further. We are aware that several large-scale attacks, such as the Westgate Shopping Mall attack, Garissa University attack, the Lamu attack, were planned and deployed from the Dadaab refugee complex by a transnational terrorist group.
The government has still to share evidence for those claims with the rest of Kenya. Officials say a task force is investigating the closure and will report back by the end of the month. $10 million have been set aside to pay for the shutdown, and the first repatriations could begin in November. The United Nations and aid groups have criticized the decision.
If the camps close, of course, we're very concerned about the protection issues related to people who could be forced to return to situations that are very violent.
Kaiseri has brushed that aside and accused the international community of double standards.
We will not be the first to do so. This is the standard practice worldwide. For example, in Europe, rich, prosperous, and democratic countries are turning away refugees from Syria, one of the worst war zones since World War II. Surveilled with immediate effect $10 million as a part of putting in place a requisite technical infrastructure to oversee the repatriation process. The government has today gazetted a task force on the repatriation of refugees, whose mandate will be to oversee, manage, expedite their repatriation and the closure of the Dadaab refugee complex.
It's not the first time the Kenyan government has threatened to shut down Dadaab refugee camp. Pressure from the international community has always prevailed. However, this time around, Nairobi says it's not backing down from its decision. But it has relented on plans to shut another camp, Kakuma, in the northwest. That's home to refugees from countries such as South Sudan. For now at least, officials have decided they're not a threat to national security. Robert Nagilo, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
Now, there's certainly been plenty of reaction on social media to the planned closure of Dadaab. CCTV's Catherine Ogunde talks us through some of that reaction.
The debate on the status of Kenya's 2 refugee camps picked up pace in 2013 when Kenya, Somalia and the UNHCR went into a tripartite agreement that would see refugees take part in voluntary repatriation. In early 2015, the government toyed with the idea of closing the camps, however was pressured by the international community not to. The controversial decision has caused outrage from members of the international community and people living outside Kenya. For those living in the country and have had to deal with numerous terror attacks since late 2011, the reaction is not really outrage but rather a show of concern. Betty Waitherero says she thinks the discussion on Dadaab and Kakuma being closed needs to be expanded, and it's not just about the government versus NGOs. Médecins Sans Frontières, which was among the first organizations to ask the Kenyan government to reconsider its decision, tweeted the closure of Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps in Kenya highlights continued and blatant neglect of millions of refugees around the world. Chitai Murabula says AU should help Kenya cope with the challenges of running the refugee camps. He feels that the camps should not be closed. And finally, SLK, a Kenyan, says the closure of refugee camps is long overdue in Kenya. The issue should go beyond the debate and onward to implementation. Catherine Ogunde, CCTV.
We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, my expert guests will help chart the future for Dadaab. Stay with us.
So we're serious about it, so we've given it a good time frame, right? We have, I think, about a year to play with. And, we need our international partners to come on board so that we can, we've injected some money into it. They should come and support that and help us to construct, right, the villages and the camps on the other side of the border that will make them comfortable, will make the Somali refugees comfortable as they go back home, right? We need to do that. We need to do that for ourselves, but we need to do this for the Somali refugees, so that they can have some stability as well. And I think that the international community needs to finally take this seriously.
Well, that was Kenyan Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Amina Mohamed, speaking of the closure of the Dadaab refugee camp. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, to help chart the future for Dadaab and its residents, I have expert guests standing by. In Nairobi, Horn of Africa research analyst Mwenda Mbijiwe. In Mogadishu, Mohamed Amin, Deputy Commissioner at the Somali National Commission for Refugees and IDPs. And with me here in studio is Agostinho Neto. He is a member of Parliament here in Kenya. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. Mohamed, in Mogadishu, let me begin with you. For nearly 25 years, Kenya has hosted what is arguably the largest number of Somali refugees at a great economic, environmental and social cost. So can Kenya's hospitality really be questioned? And number two, what's the reaction there in Mogadishu to news that Kenya is closing Dadaab?
We appreciate the Kenyan and Kenyan government and people of Kenya hosting Somali refugees for last 25 years. A large number of Somali refugees, and therefore we are always respecting Kenya, and we appreciate for this. And still, actually, the situation, we had been talking for some time with the Kenyan officials, Kenyan government member, and still we need to negotiate for this issue.
Mbijiwe, coming to you, the Kenyan government has argued that Dadaab is a security threat. They say it's used for smuggling weapons. It's a very fertile training ground for Al-Shabaab. What are the facts really? How much of a threat is this camp?
Thank you, Penina. I, first of all, truly wish to thank the government of Kenya and the government of Somalia and the United Nations Human Commission, Refugees Commission, for reaching this decision to take back the refugees back to their country. I think it's the most honorable thing. However, coming straight to the question, I think it's in the public knowledge that a few of terror threats that we've had or terror cases have found their roots back into the refugee camps. And particularly the Westgate, we know that one of the terrorists had roots, deep roots, inside the Kakuma refugee camp in the far north towards the Sudan border, South Sudan border. And even though it was not coming from Dadaab, but I think that's just one of the many proofs. Of course, we know the security problems that have been around Dadaab. We know, for example, that one of the reasons our troops went into Somalia to fight Al-Shabaab is Al-Shabaab was kidnapping aid workers, and they kidnapped aid workers who are working in Dadaab, Spanish aid workers. And so it's in public knowledge that indeed there have been a few terror cases or security situations. And I think closing those refugee camps is one of the ways to eradicate this. I think government is right about this, and we have no choice but to believe what government says.
Right, but Honorable Neto, coming to you, I see you smiling to those remarks, but let's not also ignore the fact that 3 years ago, the UNHCR got into a tripartite agreement with Kenya and Somalia, and the plan was to repatriate 500,000 refugees over the course of 3 years. Tell us what's the statement, what's the status of this agreement?
First of all, before I talk on the status of the agreement, let me just respond to a couple of things that Mr. Mbijiwe raised. In terms of refugee issues, the best principle is not to put refugees in a camp, especially if they're going to be staying for a long time. You know, in refugee law, encampment is the worst policy ever. You know, people have been in Dadaab for 30 years. Men, women, and children have been there for 30 years, idle, sitting, doing nothing. The best the government of Kenya should have done to refugees of Somali descent should have been to make sure that they integrated. In fact, right now, they're even integrated because the Somali refugees who've married Kenyan citizens. So they're already doing economic activities, they're already marrying. So in a sense, what the Kenyan government should be doing is working on laws to make them integrated. But now the second thing that you say is that there's already a framework with Kenya, Somalia, and UNHCR that, you know, one of the things, again, apart from integration, there's some Somali citizens who want to go back to Somalia. And this should be done in terms of making sure that, one, Somalia is secure. You cannot send women and children back to a place which is still war-torn. So if the international community is going to play their role, that to make centers of Somalia secure, then there will be a huge uptake of Somali refugees going back home, because Somalia is far much richer than Kenya in terms of agricultural produce and everything else. So that if you make the country secure, I do not think any Somali person will want to stay in Dadaab refugee camp, because Dadaab in itself is dehumanizing. There's no toilet, there's no water, there's no food. No one wants to live on food rations for 30 years. So in fact, I really think it is dehumanizing. It's a denial of dignity for the government of Kenya to think that to live in the circumstances in Dadaab is a favor. It is not.
Right. So let's pick up on that point, Mohammed, because that tripartite agreement, of course, highlighted the obligations of the Somali government to create conditions, safe conditions, where the refugees can come back home. Now, what is the plan? Does the government have a plan where these refugees are resettled in a safe and dignified manner?
We had been assigned on the agreement, tripartite, and then we had been formed the tripartite commission for Somali government member and ministerial level, including the technical level, and also the Kenya and UNHCR. And still we have that plan and that agreement our side. And this 27th of this May, we have meeting in Nairobi. What we are actually want to solve the situation is through negotiation, through dialogue, through suggestions and discussion and cooperation. That is the only way we can solve the problem. What and the MB said, or my friend Kenya side, the security and or long time. Yes, these people, the Somali refugees, had been long time in the Kenyan soil. Yes, and what actually we are planning is people to come back their home country, and we are working together. Yes, I agree. Kenya side, international community are not playing. They are not playing a good role. They are not supporting this tripartite planning. We planned now 5,000 families from the refugee to resettle in Kismayu, and also another 5,000 to resettle in Dadaab. All this it needs the support and assistance. International community, where the Kenyans all the time arguing, we are absolutely agreed with them. International community are not playing a very good role. But when it comes Kenya and Somalia, better if we will cooperate together, because As you know, these refugees, 70% or more than 70% are young people. These young people, they studying in Kenya. They are very well and educated. Some of them are high education. Some of them are secondary or middle school educated. So these people, if they will just kick from Kenya and push to come to Somalia without organizing manner, then they will going to join any kind of violence. So this is not good for security of Kenya and security of Somalia and whole the neighboring country or in the region. So therefore, we still requesting Kenya government to cooperate with the Somali government and UNHCR and international community, and then we have to continue planning to resettle these people inside Somalia. Since we agreed the tripartite commission agreement in 2013, actually people, many refugee returnees was voluntarily, that was the agreement actually. Anyone who are voluntarily willing to go back to Somalia to support and to assist. Now we have to make big number. This year we were planned, 2016 we were planned 50,000 Somali refugees to return back, to come back to Somalia.
Right.
That is what our plan was.
All right.
Together with all the tripartite commission. So we need the support from the international community.
All right. So Mohammed there, of course, insisting on the coordinated efforts of everybody. But Mbijiwe, let me come to you, because the UN did say it had planned to repatriate 50,000 refugees this year, but said that would be difficult because the Somali government is still fighting Al-Shabaab. In your opinion, is Somali safe enough to resettle these refugees?
Penina, be it known to the world today that the security situation in Somalia has tremendously improved, and as our colleague on the other side was saying, I think Somalia is ready to receive its children, or rather her children. You know, one of the factors of statehood is population. A population is part of what makes a state, other than the boundaries, other than the sovereignty. And so Somalia now has a boundary, as we know, I mean, from independence. We know it has its sovereignty. The war that was there, the Al-Shabaab, has greatly been pushed back by the AMISOM forces and all other international forces cooperating with the support of the development partners. And so security has improved to a large extent. Now, if we do not at this point, therefore, inject into the nation, the population of the nation that was, you know, forced out of the country by war, then we'll have created a vacuum. And as we say, nature hates vacuum. We cannot, you know, clean up Al-Shabaab completely and not fill those spaces with the population of the indigenous citizens of that country. Right. And so I think the country is safe enough, and it's time we send back these Somali brothers and sisters. And as Honorable Neto said, I mean, it's the most dignified thing to do, to send them back to their country. Okay, but Honorable Neto, Mohammed in Mogadishu was saying the international community hasn't done enough. It hasn't supported this tripartite agreement. What is it should be doing? First, at the Brussels pledging conference, the international community had pledged to put in $500 million to help the Somali repatriation program. So far, $395 million of that money has not been put onto the basket, which means that it's less than a quarter of the pledges that the international community did say that they're going to give. So in terms of helping Kenya and Somalia fast track this particular thing, let the donors and the international community honor their pledges. That's the first thing. But the second thing is also to help strengthen the strength of AMISOM, so that, you know, the safe pockets of Somalia that are safe are expanded. That way there's going to be a quick uptick of many of the returnees back home. Because right now, you do not have a large scale, not very many large parts of Somalia safe. So AMISOM and other UN-related peacekeepers should be sent into Somalia to expand the surface that is safe to live in. But the third thing, Kenya, as a big brother in the region, needs to play its part. Kenya is not doing very well in terms of lobbying the international community to come and help. You know, there's a World Humanitarian Summit that is coming right now in the next couple of weeks. Kenya needs to use that particular one to put up its case of refugee burden sharing, as opposed to refugee burden. You know, they're not blaming people. They're not blaming the refugees for all this manner insecurity. So Kenya has not done that very well in the past few years, and that's why
Kenya is bearing the refugee burden. What can the international community do in a better way?
All right, Mohammed, the UN has warned that closing Dadaab will have devastating consequences, and not just for Kenya and Somalia, but for the entire region. Just paint us a picture of what the consequences would be.
Yeah, actually, as you said now, consequences will be, is very dangerous to going to develop because of large number, without a preparation of resettlement, without preparation of job creation inside Somalia, without no hope, then what we are going to expect? What we are going to expect is then this will create another violence, and then the Shabab and others will get support from these young people and this situation. So that's why we are warning to international community all the time, and every country and in the region. This we have to cooperate together. It needs the cooperation and the support by the international community, and through resettlement and through every Somali in the refugee camp, they want to come back to Somalia.
Indeed.
Everyone, when you are talking with them, for example, the parent, they were talking about their children are going to school. They have shelter, they have and water and security. If they will get the promise and also the guarantee inside Somalia, they will get what they have in Kenya. They are willing to come back to Somalia. So this is the position now we're standing. We are standing same position with all the tripartite. Actually, we are planning to support the people willing to come back to Somalia. Somalia government is ready.
Mohammed, allow me to chip in there, because there's a question I want to pose to Mbijiwe, and that's Mbijiwe, what Mohammed talked about, that we have young people angry and employed. Doesn't this pose a security threat, an even bigger security threat for Kenya, in the sense that this provides a very fertile training ground for Al-Shabaab?
Absolutely not. Al-Shabaab is going to be so disappointed when they try to recruit these young men, because most of these young men that today are in their 20s were born in these refugee camps. And I'll tell you, there is nothing dehumanizing in this world as to spend a quarter of your life or even half of your life in a refugee camp. We know there are people who have turned into grandmothers and grandfathers in those refugee camps. These young men were born in refugee camps, they're in their 20s in refugee camp, and they can't wait to taste the fruits of freedom, the fruits of living in a country where you don't have to produce your ID card or live in a confined area or face police arrest every time you try to move around the country. Now, these young men are all cultured in what we call the culture of peace. They have lived in a country where there is peace. They have lived in northeastern, and others have lived in Kakuma where there is peace. They have the culture of peace in them. And when they go back to their country, you will be surprised that they'll become ambassadors of peace. This is what happened to Rwanda. Rwanda today is one of the emerging economies of Africa. But half of the population of Rwanda that is in Rwanda today spent their growing years in refugee camps in Uganda and Tanzania, and some in Kenya, and some in the Congo. And when time to return to their country came, they actually returned to their country under the fire of bullets. There was a fight. Some went back as fighters, under the leadership of President Kagame at that time, RPF, and today it's a country that is built, and there is no semblance of war in Rwanda. In fact, Rwanda has become a case study on how to transform from war to peace. And so we should not cut the dreams of these honorable brothers and sisters from Somalia and fear that Al-Shabaab will be waiting for them. In fact, the opposite should be true. Al-Shabaab should be fearing that when they come, they will just clean them up.
So, Honorable Neto, what would you prescribe as a lasting solution for the refugee crisis in the Horn of Africa?
One, for Kenya, that is going to be hosting refugees anyway. Even if you send away the Somali refugees, Kenya is sitting up in a place where there's conflict in the Great Lakes region. So I really think one thing that Kenya needs to do in terms of long-term dealing with refugees, Kenya needs to work on a law that looks into durable solutions for refugees. You know, issues of integration, issues of repatriation, and issues of resettlements for refugees. That would go a long way, because Kenya's greatest problem right now is a law that lacks in terms of how to deal with the refugees in an organized manner. But the second thing for Kenya right now, I think they can do, Kenya ought to move towards renegotiating the tripartite agreement in terms of making it efficient and ironing out the bottlenecks that was within the tripartite agreement. Because for the first time in 30 years, we are watching Somali refugees go back home, which means there's a possibility of all of them moving back to Somalia in case the tripartite agreement is made efficient and also the international community supporting. But the third thing that I do not want Kenya to underestimate is the insecurity of forcefully repatriating Somali refugees. I mean, Mbijiwe is running away from one straight fact. Al-Shabaab getting young boys who are idle back into Somalia, who've been forcefully sent back to a war-torn country. These young men know Kiswahili. Some of them have ID cards of Kenya. Some of them know this country so well. We will be sitting on a hot precipice. And I really think Kenya needs to be very careful. Let's move cautiously. We agree the refugee burden is not just only a Kenyan problem. It's a national community problem. But how we handle it also looks forward in terms of helping Kenya deal with its internal security. I'd really request my colleagues in the executive to move cautiously. Let's support Somalians to go back home peacefully. But let's also work within our internal dynamics to make sure that they can go back peacefully, and the rest who do not want to go back, because half of them are even citizens of Kenya, having been born. You hear what they're saying. Some of them are born in Nairobi, and the Kenyan constitution says very well, when you're born here of refugee parents and some married to Kenyans, I don't think some of them are Kenyan citizens. So we must be very careful in terms of who do you want to send back to Somalia.
All right. Well, that's all we have time for this week, but thank you to my guests for their insights. In Nairobi, Horn of Africa research analyst Mwenda Mbijiwe. In Mogadishu, Mohamed Amin, Deputy Commissioner at the National Commission for Refugees and IDPs, and Honorable Member Agostinho Neto, Member of Parliament for the Republic of Kenya. Now remember, you can join the conversation at home through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. To join us again next week for another edition of Talk Africa. I'm Penina Karibe. Bye-bye.